Can you imagine relying on an animal to protect your home? Now imagine that this animal has no eyes, that it lives in complete darkness, and yet is capable of facing a danger you couldn't have anticipated. What would you have done if, in the middle of the night, an intruder entered your house? This is the story of Homer, a blind cat who, against all odds, proved that bravery doesn't depend on sight, but on the heart. A story that moves, inspires, and makes us ask, can we underestimate a being because of its limitations without seeing its true strength? It was a quiet night in Miami, Florida. The clock read 2 a.m., and the sound of the wind softly hit the windows of Gwen Cooper's apartment. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Homer, her loyal black cat, was peacefully sleeping on the bed, as he did every night since Gwen rescued him when he was just a kitten. But that night, something would change forever. Homer had entered Gwen's life as an unexpected miracle. He had been found with a severe eye infection which led the veterinarians to remove his eyes completely. Most people thought a cat like this couldn't live a normal life, that he would be fragile and dependent. But Gwen knew Homer was special. From the very first day, he demonstrated an indomitable spirit, curious and brave. Despite his blindness, Homer moved with astonishing agility. He knew exactly when someone entered the room, could perceive the slightest changes in his environment, and reacted quickly to any situation. He was a cat who defied logic and proved that instinct is more powerful than sight. That night, however, Homer sensed something different in the air. A strange scent, an unfamiliar presence, a barely perceptible sound that didn't belong in the house. His whole body tensed. Something wasn't right. Gwen, deeply asleep, noticed nothing, but Homer did, and his instinct screamed at him to act. The thief had entered through a window that had been left ajar. He thought it would be an easy job. A sleeping woman, no guard dog, a house in silence. He didn't count on the fact that, in the darkness, there was an unexpected guardian. A guardian without eyes, but with a fierce heart. The intruder moved silently through the living room, searching for valuables. He moved cautiously, confident in his ability to make no noise, but he didn't know that, in the darkness, Homer heard everything. Every step, every controlled breath, every creak of the floor. And Homer wasn't going to stay still. Suddenly, a sharp sound ripped through the silence. A fierce hiss, an unmistakable warning. The thief stopped, confused. He hadn't expected to find an animal in the house, and especially not one that seemed to perceive him without needing to see him. Before he could react, a black blur jumped at him with astonishing speed. Homer landed on the intruder with his claws extended, attacking without hesitation. His small but sharp claws ripped into the man's skin, who let out a muffled scream and immediately retreated. Fear took hold of him. What kind of creature was this? The thief tried to shake the cat off, but Homer clung with determination. He bit the man's hand with force, causing him to drop the bag where he had already begun to stash valuables. The pain and confusion made the intruder stumble and trip over a piece of furniture. The crash woke Gwen, who immediately sat up, dazed and frightened. Her eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness, but soon she saw a staggering silhouette and heard Homer's battle cries. With her heart racing, she turned on the light and saw it all. A strange man struggling with her cat, and her cat, her beloved Homer, fighting with the courage of a lion. Gwen didn't hesitate. She screamed with all her might and ran to the phone. The thief, already injured and completely bewildered, knew he had lost. In a final desperate attempt, he managed to shove Homer off and ran toward the exit. But he didn't leave unscathed. Homer, despite being thrown to the ground, immediately got back up and chased after the man to the door, letting out aggressive hisses and growls. The fear on the intruder's face was evident. He had been defeated not by a guard dog or a weapon, but by a blind cat with the heart of a warrior. The sound of sirens broke the silence of the night. Gwen, with the phone still in her hand, saw the patrol car lights reflecting in the windows. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling, but a feeling of relief washed over her. She knew they were safe. Homer stayed by the door as if he wanted to make sure that the danger had truly gone. Gwen picked him up, feeling his small body vibrating from the adrenaline. "You're my hero," she whispered, kissing his head. The officers entered and secured the area. "Did your cat do this?" one of them asked, observing the scratches on the thief's arm. Gwen nodded with pride. Homer, the blind cat, had saved the day. The officers interrogated Gwen, trying to reconstruct the events. As she spoke, she couldn't help but look at Homer, who was now curled up in her lap, still alert, as if expecting danger to return at any moment. His ears moved slightly, picking up every sound around him, proving that, although he couldn't see, nothing escaped his perception. The thief, handcuffed and with obvious injuries on his arms and face, muttered excuses, trying to explain his failure. "I didn't think there was an animal," he murmured softly. One of the officers smiled in disbelief. "I think you underestimated the guardian of this house," he replied, before escorting the thief out of the apartment. When everything seemed to calm down, Gwen finally sat on the couch, holding Homer even tighter. She knew she had a special cat, but that night, her love and admiration for him grew even more. She remembered all the times Homer had been by her side during her darkest moments, how he had been her unconditional companion in days of sadness and loneliness, and now he had saved her life. The adrenaline still coursed through her body, but a deep sense of gratitude settled in her chest. She looked at Homer, gently stroking his fur. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she whispered. Homer, as if he understood every word, rubbed his head against her cheek and let out a deep, comforting purr. That night, Gwen couldn't sleep. She sat up in her bed with Homer beside her, protecting him as he had protected her. She stared at the window through which the intruder had entered and promised herself she would reinforce the security of her home. She didn't want to go through such an experience again, but she knew that as long as she had Homer, she would never be completely defenseless. The following days were filled with visits and phone calls. Her friends and family couldn't believe what had happened. "Your cat did what?" they exclaimed in disbelief. Gwen retold the story over and over again, each time with more pride. Homer was becoming a little legend among those who knew her. Even the media became interested in the story. A local journalist asked to interview her. Gwen accepted without hesitation. She wanted the world to know about Homer, not just for his bravery, but also to show that animals with disabilities are not less capable, less brave, or less deserving of love. The day of the interview, a television crew arrived at her apartment. They adjusted lights and cameras while Gwen held Homer in her lap. The journalist smiled, gently stroking the cat's head. "It's incredible to think that this little warrior defended his home with such bravery," she said. Gwen smiled and looked at Homer with tenderness. "He's always been brave. It's just that now the world knows it." During the recording, Gwen shared how Homer had come into her life, how he had overcome the challenges of blindness with a strength that inspired. "He doesn't need eyes to see what really matters," she said, her voice full of emotion. The story went viral. Thousands of people shared the video, leaving comments of admiration and love. Many talked about their own pets with disabilities and how, just like Homer, they had shown unwavering resilience. Gwen received messages from all over the world, from people who were inspired by the bravery of her cat. With Homer's unexpected fame, proposals began to come from animal rescue organizations and animal rights activists. They wanted Gwen and Homer to help raise awareness about the adoption of animals with disabilities. These animals were often the first to be ignored in shelters labeled as hard to adopt. But Homer was the living proof that these animals could lead lives full of love and meaning. Gwen accepted with enthusiasm. Along with Homer, she began participating in events and campaigns that promoted the adoption of pets with special needs. People were moved when they heard his story in person, seeing how Homer, despite his blindness, walked with confidence, explored his surroundings with curiosity, and showed immense affection for those around him. One day, at one of these events, a woman approached Gwen with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing Homer's story," she said with a trembling voice. "I always thought that an animal with a disability couldn't be happy, but now I see how much love and courage they have. I adopted a blind cat yesterday, and it was because of you." Gwen felt a lump in her throat. She looked at Homer and gently petted him. She knew that her little hero hadn't only saved her life that night, but now he was saving many more. Over time, Homer became a symbol of resilience and unconditional love. Gwen wrote a book about his story, detailing his rescue and the night he faced the intruder. The book became a success, reaching people from all over the world who found inspiration in the bravery of a little blind cat. Homer's social media also grew. Every day, Gwen shared photos and videos of him showing how he enjoyed life without limitations. Through these platforms, more people learned to value animals with disabilities, and many were inspired to give them a chance in their homes. Years later, Homer was still the same brave cat he had always been. Even though his story had been told all around the world, for Gwen, he remained her faithful companion, the little warrior who had changed her life forever. One night, as Gwen settled into her bed with Homer by her side, she hugged him tightly. "I will never stop thanking you," she whispered. Homer purred, his way of saying that he didn't need words to understand it. There was a bond between them that went beyond sight, beyond words, an unbreakable bond forged in love, trust, and limitless courage. And so, in the warmth of her home with Homer dozing beside her, Gwen knew he would always be her hero. The impact of Homer's story continued to grow even more when various animal protection organizations began inviting Gwen to international events. They traveled together to conferences and adoption fairs in different cities, where Homer was the guest of honor. People were moved when they saw him up close, moving with confidence, showing that his lack of sight was not an obstacle to living life to the fullest. At one of these conferences, an elderly man approached Gwen with a nostalgic smile. "Your story reminded me of my dog, Max," he said with emotion. "He was deaf and blind, but he taught me more about life than any person. Thank you for giving a voice to these animals." Gwen realized that Homer's story was not just changing the perception of cats with disabilities, but also resonating with those who had shared their lives with extraordinary pets. The trip to a convention in New York was particularly special. Homer was honored with an Animal Courage Award, recognizing him as an example of resilience and unconditional love. Gwen held Homer in her arms as he received the distinction, and with her voice choked with emotion, she thanked those who had adopted animals with special needs. Homer doesn't see the world as we do, but he feels it fully. He reminds us that love and loyalty do not depend on physical perfection. That recognition brought with it new opportunities. A publisher proposed to Gwen turning Homer's story into a children's book. The idea thrilled her immediately. How many children could learn about inclusion and empathy through the story of her little warrior? And so, Homer, the Brave Cat was born, an illustrated book that was warmly received by parents and teachers. With the book's launch, Homer became an even bigger icon. Schools began inviting Gwen to read the story to children. During the visits, Homer wandered among the little ones who pet him with awe and tenderness. "How does he know where we are if he can't see?" they asked, fascinated. Gwen smiled and explained, "Homer doesn't need eyes to know you're here. He feels it with his heart." On one of these visits, a child approached Gwen and whispered, "I have a little brother who can't see, but now I know he can do amazing things, just like Homer." That sentence stayed etched in her mind. Homer's story not only inspired people to adopt animals with disabilities, but it also helped children to better understand diversity in all its forms. As Gwen and Homer continued to share their story, the bond between them grew even stronger. Homer was now an older cat, but he remained as bold as ever. He moved through the house with the same confidence, jumped onto the furniture without hesitation, and purred loudly when Gwen hugged him. The years passed and Homer began showing signs of aging. Though his spirit remained intact, his movements became slower and he spent more time resting. Gwen cared for him with unwavering devotion, ensuring he had all the love and comfort possible. She knew that every day with him was a gift. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the window, Gwen sat beside Homer on the couch and began to write in her journal. She had been keeping a record of their story since the day she adopted him, noting every lesson he had taught her. When she finished writing, she looked at Homer, who was peacefully sleeping beside her. She gently stroked him and whispered, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." It was a moment of absolute peace, a moment when time seemed to stand still. Gwen knew that no matter how much time she had left with Homer, their story had already left an indelible mark on the world. As time passed, Homer's story continued to inspire new generations. His social media accounts remained active, sharing memories and lessons about life with an animal with special needs. Gwen received messages from people who had adopted blind cats, deaf dogs, or animals with amputated limbs, all thanking her for the lesson Homer had taught them. Love knows no barriers. Homer's legacy remained alive in every corner where his story was told. To Gwen, he was never just a cat. He was her best friend, her protector, her teacher. And although the years passed, the memory of that night when Homer chased away the thief remained intact in her mind, not because of the danger they faced, but because of what that night symbolized, the definitive proof that Homer was no ordinary cat. Some stories deserve to be told over and over again, and Homer's was one of them. That little blind warrior had changed lives, broken prejudices, and demonstrated that even in the darkness, there can still be light if the heart is strong enough to guide the way. Time moved forward, and although Homer grew older, his indomitable spirit remained intact. Gwen noticed that he slept more hours and his jumps weren't as agile as before, but he still had that special energy that made her smile. Every purr of his continued to fill the house with an indescribable peace. However, she knew she had to prepare for the inevitable passage of time. One day, Gwen received an invitation to speak at a conference about animals with disabilities. It was an important event full of experts and advocates for animal rights. She hesitated to accept as Homer didn't enjoy long trips as much anymore, but the idea of sharing his story with more people convinced her. She decided to do something different. Instead of bringing Homer, she would bring a presentation with videos and photos showcasing his incredible life. On the day of the conference, Gwen took the stage with a racing heart. In front of her, hundreds of people were waiting to hear her story. She spoke about Homer with the same emotion she had when she first shared his tale. The images of her brave cat lit up the screen, showing his evolution from a rescued kitten to the icon of resilience he had become. When she finished her speech, the audience erupted in applause. Many people approached her to thank her and share their own experiences with special needs pets. Gwen felt comforted knowing that Homer's story had inspired so many people to adopt animals with disabilities and give them a chance at a dignified and loving life. Everyday life with Homer continued to be filled with simple but unforgettable moments. Gwen cherished every moment with him, aware that each day was a gift. Although his body no longer responded with the same energy, his unconditional love remained intact. They spent entire afternoons together on the couch, Gwen reading and Homer curled up on her lap, softly purring. One day, Gwen received an email that deeply moved her. It was from an organization that was creating a shelter for animals with disabilities, and they wanted Homer to be the face of their awareness campaign. The idea touched her deeply. Knowing that the story of her little warrior would help save more lives filled her with pride. She accepted immediately and began collaborating with them, using her platform to promote the cause. The shelter opened its doors a few months later, and at its inauguration, a huge image of Homer adorned the entrance. "Home of Heroes," the sign read. Gwen couldn't hold back her tears as she saw how Homer's legacy continued to grow. Dozens of cats and dogs with disabilities found a safe place, all thanks to the inspiration he had sparked. Gwen's love for Homer never diminished. On the contrary, with the years, their bond only grew stronger. However, the day she had always feared arrived. One cold autumn morning, Homer didn't get up from his bed as he usually did. Gwen found him sleeping, breathing with difficulty. She snuggled next to him, gently stroking him and whispering how much she loved him. The vet confirmed that age had caught up to Homer. He wasn't in pain, but his body was very weak. Gwen knew she had to make the hardest decision. She held him in her arms while he softly purred. "Thank you for everything, my little warrior," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Homer, in his final gesture of love, rubbed his head against Gwen's hand before closing his eyes for the last time. The house felt empty without Homer, but his presence still filled every corner. Gwen found comfort in the memories and in the impact he had left on the world. Her social media accounts were filled with messages from people sharing anecdotes about how Homer's story had changed their lives. To honor Homer's memory, Gwen decided to continue her work in advocating for animals with disabilities. She became an ambassador for the shelter and began writing a second book, this time about the importance of giving love to the animals that need it the most. She knew Homer would be proud of her. In the following weeks, Gwen felt Homer's absence intensely, but one day while visiting the shelter, a small black cat with a scar on its face caught her attention. The cat approached timidly, as if it recognized her. Its large ears moved attentively to her voice. Gwen felt an immediate connection. This wasn't Homer, but it had the same fighting spirit. She held him in her arms and, with a smile full of emotion, whispered, "Welcome home." The return home with her new companion was emotional. Gwen felt a lump in her throat as she remembered the first time she brought Homer home. This small black cat, with its scar as a testament to its own struggle, was now part of her life. She decided to name him Noah, in honor of resilience and new beginnings. The first days with Noah were a process of adaptation. Although he wasn't blind, he was very distrustful and seemed to have been through difficult experiences. Gwen gave him space, allowing him to explore his new home at his own pace. Slowly, Noah began to trust her, seeking her company and allowing her to pet him. One afternoon, while Gwen worked on her book, Noah jumped onto the desk and curled up next to the computer. It was a simple gesture, but for her it meant so much. Noah was beginning to understand that he was safe, that he had found his home. And Gwen, for the first time in a long while, felt her heart heal a little more. The shelter continued to grow, and Gwen decided to get even more involved. She organized adoption and awareness campaigns, sharing the story of Homer and other resilient animals with more and more people. Every time she saw a family adopting a cat or dog with a disability, she felt that her mission had a larger purpose. Noah also became part of these initiatives. Although he was shy at first, over time he became a symbol of second chances. His story inspired many people to give animals that seemed less adoptable a chance. Gwen knew that Homer would be proud to see the impact his legacy had left on the world. One night, while Gwen watched Noah dozing on the couch, she felt a peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at a photo of Homer on the wall and smiled. "You're still here with me," she thought. Homer's story had changed her life, but it had also changed the lives of many others. And in every rescued animal, in every adoption completed, his spirit lived on. Over time, Gwen published her second book, titled Beyond Sight, The Story of Homer and the Legacy of the Invisible Heroes. It was a tribute not only to Homer, but to all animals who, despite their limitations, demonstrated unconditional love and unparalleled strength. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the world shared their own stories of resilient pets, and Gwen felt that, in some way, Homer had united an entire community. The book became an educational tool in many schools and shelters. Readings for children were organized, teaching them about empathy, inclusion, and respect for all living beings. Gwen attended these events with Noah, who had become her new companion on adventures. Though different from Homer, he too was a little warrior with a story to tell. The years passed, and Gwen remained dedicated to the cause that had changed her life. Every time she saw an animal with special needs find a home, she felt she was fulfilling the promise she made to Homer, to keep fighting for those who needed it the most. Noah, now fully adapted and confident, had become her faithful companion, reminding her each day of the importance of giving second chances. One afternoon, as Gwen walked through the shelter, a volunteer approached her with a smile. "There's someone here who wants to meet you," she said, pointing to a family who had just adopted a deaf dog. Gwen walked over to greet them. "Thank you for giving him a home," she said sincerely. The mother of the family smiled. "It was Homer's story that made us make this decision," she confessed. Gwen felt a shiver of emotion run through her body. Even after all these years, Homer's impact was still alive in every act of love and compassion. That night, when she arrived home, Gwen sat in her favorite chair with Noah curled up beside her. She looked at the starry sky through the window and closed her eyes. In her heart, she knew that Homer had never truly left. He was in every life he had changed, in every story of resilience he had inspired. And most of all, he was in her, in the way she had learned to love unconditionally, to fight for what's right, and to believe in second chances. With a smile, she gently stroked Noah and whispered, "Thank you, Homer, for everything." And in the silence of the night, Noah's purring filled the room, like a distant echo of the unbreakable love that had started with a little blind cat who became a hero. And so we end another incredible story of bravery and heroism. On your channel, AMAZE Heroes, we celebrate all those extraordinary beings who, regardless of their species, have demonstrated astonishing courage. If this story inspired you, don't forget to leave us your like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more amazing tales. See you in the next adventure where heroism knows no limits.